A human waitress stands before the ancient vampire council, her voice steady despite the death glares. "You can question my worthiness until the sun burns out," Iris declares, to creatures who've lived for millennia. "But I will not abandon this family." Behind her, the vampire king rises from his throne. "Any who oppose may challenge me directly." Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from and don't forget to click subscribe. The cemetery was quiet at 3 in the morning, the kind of deep silence that made Iris feel like she was the only person left in the world. She walked the familiar path between the headstones, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from the field behind her apartment. The graveyard shift at the diner had ended an hour ago, but she always came here before going home, always made time for these visits that had become as essential as breathing. Her mother's grave was in the older section, beneath an oak tree that had been ancient when the town was founded. The headstone was simple, just a name and 2 dates, but Iris kept it clean and decorated with fresh flowers every week. It had been 5 years since the cancer took her mother, 5 years of learning to live alone, 5 years of midnight visits to a grave that still felt like the closest thing to home. She was so focused on her destination that she almost didn't see the child. The girl was small, maybe 6 or 7 years old, curled up on the grass beside a headstone Iris didn't recognize. Her dark hair spilled across the ground like ink, and even in the dim moonlight, Iris could see she was shivering, her thin dress inadequate for the autumn chill. She was fast asleep, her small body pressed against the cold stone as if seeking comfort from something that could no longer provide it. Iris knew what it looked like when someone was sleeping on their mother's grave. She approached slowly, not wanting to frighten the child. "Hey there," she said softly. "Sweetheart, wake up. It's not safe to sleep out here." The child stirred, her eyes fluttering open, and Iris felt her breath catch in her throat. Those eyes were silver, bright and luminous in a way that seemed to catch light that wasn't there, and they held a depth of sadness that no child should know. For a moment, the girl just stared at her, confusion and fear flickering across her delicate features, and then she scrambled backward until her back pressed against the headstone, her small hands clutching the grass as if it could anchor her to safety. "It's okay," Iris said quickly, holding up her hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Iris. I work at the diner down the road. What's your name, sweetheart?" The child didn't answer, her silver eyes wide and wary, but she stopped trying to retreat, which Iris took as a small victory. Up close, she could see more details. The expensive fabric of the girl's dress despite its thin construction, the delicate chain around her neck holding a pendant that looked like it cost more than Iris made in a year, the pallor of her skin that seemed almost luminous in the darkness. "Are you here visiting someone?" Iris asked gently, gesturing toward the headstone the girl had been sleeping against. "Is this your mom's grave?" Something flickered in those silver eyes, a pain so raw and fresh that Iris felt it like a physical blow. The child nodded once, a tiny movement that seemed to take all her strength, and then she whispered a single word in a voice that was barely audible. "Mama." The word broke something open in Iris's chest, flooding her with memories of her own grief, her own desperate need to be close to the person she had lost. She had done this same thing in the months after her mother died, had spent countless nights sleeping on this very ground because it was the closest she could get to feeling her mother's presence. She understood this child in a way that went beyond words, beyond logic, beyond the strangeness of finding her here, alone in the darkness. "I know," Iris said softly, her voice thick with emotion she couldn't quite control. "I know exactly how that feels. My mom is buried here too, just over there under the big tree. Sometimes I come here at night because it makes me feel closer to her." The child's eyes widened slightly, some of the fear fading as she recognized something in Iris's words, in her tone, in the grief that Iris had never quite learned to hide. "You miss her too?" she asked, her voice small and wondering. "Every single day," Iris confirmed. "It's been 5 years and I still miss her every single day. Does that make you feel a little less alone?" The child nodded again, more firmly this time, and some of the tension in her small body began to ease. "I miss my mama," she said, the words tumbling out with the force of something long held back. "She went to sleep, and she didn't wake up, and Father says she's in the earth now, but I wanted to be close to her, so I came here, and I fell asleep, waiting for her to talk to me, but she never does anymore." Iris felt tears prick at her eyes, the child's grief echoing her own in ways that made her chest ache. "She can't talk to you the way she used to," she said gently, "but that doesn't mean she's not listening. When I come here, I tell my mom about my day, about the customers at the diner, about the flowers I found for her. I like to think she hears me, even if she can't answer back." "Does it help?" the child asked, her silver eyes searching Iris's face with an intensity that seemed far older than her years. "Sometimes," Iris admitted honestly. "Sometimes it makes me feel better, and sometimes it makes me sadder. But I keep coming because even the sad moments are better than feeling like I've forgotten her, like she didn't matter." The child seemed to consider this for a long moment, her small brow furrowed in thought. Then, with the sudden decisiveness of youth, she scrambled to her feet and held out her hand toward Iris. "Will you stay with me?" she asked. "Just for a little while? I don't want to be alone anymore." Iris took the offered hand without hesitation, feeling how cold the child's fingers were, how fragile her grip seemed despite the strength of her request. "I'll stay," she promised. "But sweetheart, we need to get you somewhere warm. You're freezing out here. Is there someone I can call?" "Your father. You mentioned him. Does he know where you are?" The fear that crossed the child's face was immediate and intense. "No," she said quickly. "Please don't tell Father. He'll be so angry. He told me not to come here alone, but I couldn't help it. I needed to see Mama. I needed to be close to her. Please don't tell him." Iris's heart broke a little more at the desperation in that small voice. "Okay," she said soothingly. "Okay, I won't call anyone right now, but we can't stay out here all night. You'll catch your death of cold. How about we go to the diner? It's warm there, and I can make you some hot chocolate and we can figure out what to do together. Does that sound okay?" The child hesitated, clearly torn between her fear of being discovered and her obvious discomfort in the cold night air. Finally, she nodded, her small hand tightening around Iris's. "Hot chocolate sounds nice," she admitted. "Mama used to make me hot chocolate when I couldn't sleep." "Then hot chocolate it is," Iris said, standing and keeping the child's hand firmly in hers. "Come on, sweetheart. The diner is just a short walk from here, and I have the keys because I just finished my shift. We'll get you warmed up, and then we can talk about what to do next." They walked through the cemetery together, the child pressing close to Iris's side as if afraid she might disappear. As they walked, the girl began to talk, the floodgates opened by Iris's kindness, words pouring out that had clearly been bottled up for too long. "My name is Liliana," she said. "I'm 7 years old and I live in the big house on the hill. Father says I'm not supposed to talk to strangers, but you don't feel like a stranger. You feel safe. Mama used to feel safe like that." "When did your mama go to sleep, Liliana?" Iris asked gently. 2 months ago," Liliana answered, her voice cracking. "Father says time will make it hurt less, but it still hurts just as much. Maybe even more because now I'm starting to forget little things about her. I'm scared I'm going to forget everything." Iris squeezed the child's hand. "You won't forget the important things. I promise. I still remember the way my mom laughed, the way she called me her sunshine girl. Those things stay with you forever." "Really?" Liliana looked up at her with something like hope in those strange silver eyes. Really? Iris confirmed. And you know what else helps? Talking about her. Telling stories about her. Every time you share a memory of your mama with someone else, you make that memory stronger. You keep her alive in a different way. They reached the diner, a small building with a flickering neon sign that proclaimed it Rosie's. Iris unlocked the door and led Liliana inside, guiding the child to a booth near the kitchen where it was warmest. "Sit here," she said, grabbing a clean apron and wrapping it around Liliana's thin shoulders like a blanket. "I'm going to make that hot chocolate I promised." "Thank you," Liliana whispered, wrapping her small hands around the warm ceramic. "This is the nicest thing anyone has done for me since Mama went to sleep." Iris slid into the booth across from her, her own hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that she desperately needed after the emotional exhaustion of the past hour. "Tell me about her," she said softly. "Tell me about your mama. What was she like?" And Liliana did. The words flowed out of her like water from a broken dam. Stories about a mother who had loved her fiercely, who had sung her lullabies in a language Liliana couldn't understand but loved anyway, who had made every day feel special even when nothing special was happening. She talked about gardens and paintings and long walks through the forest, about a woman who had seemed to glow from within, who had made everyone around her feel loved and valued. Iris listened to every word, asking questions when Liliana paused, encouraging her when she stumbled over particularly painful memories, offering tissues when the tears came too fast to stop. She learned that Liliana's mother had been named Elena, that she had been gentle and kind and impossibly beautiful, that she had been sick for a long time before the end, but had hidden it from Liliana to protect her from worry. "She didn't want me to be sad," Liliana said, her voice breaking. "She said she wanted me to remember her happy, not sick. But now she's gone, and I didn't get to say goodbye properly, and I don't know how to be happy when she's not here anymore." Iris reached across the table and took Liliana's hands in her own. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "Your mama loved you more than anything in the world. I can tell that from the way you talk about her, from every single memory you've shared. And that love doesn't go away just because she's not here anymore. It's inside you, Liliana. Every time you remember her, every time you tell a story about her, every time you do something that would have made her proud, you're keeping that love alive." "But what if I forget?" Liliana whispered, the fear in her voice raw and real. "Then you ask people to remind you," Iris said simply. "You ask your father, your family, anyone who knew her. And if you ever need someone to listen while you remember, you can come find me. I'll be here, Liliana. I understand what you're going through, and I'll always have time for you." The sound of the diner door slamming open made them both jump. Iris looked up to see a figure in the doorway, tall and dark and radiating fury so intense. It seemed to fill the room. Her first thought was that he was beautiful, in a way that didn't seem quite human, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that burned with silver fire matching Liliana's. Her second thought was that he was terrifying, power rolling off him in waves. "Liliana." His voice was low and controlled, but Iris heard the fear beneath the anger. "Do you have any idea what you've put me through? I have had every guard searching for you for 3 hours." "Father, I'm sorry," Liliana said, but she grabbed Iris's hand instead of going to him. "But Iris isn't a stranger. She understands. She misses her mama too." Something flickered across the man's face, too quick for Iris to identify, and his burning gaze shifted from his daughter to her. She felt the weight of his attention like a physical force, pressing against her, evaluating her, trying to understand what kind of creature had managed to earn his daughter's trust in the span of a few hours. "You're the waitress from this diner," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I've seen you before, through the windows, When I drive through this pathetic little town, you work the night shift." "That's right," Iris said, finding her voice despite the fear that was trying to close her throat. "My name is Iris. I found Liliana in the cemetery, sleeping on her mother's grave. She was cold and scared and alone, so I brought her here to warm up. I was going to figure out how to contact her family as soon as she felt better." "You found her in the cemetery?" His voice had changed, the anger giving way to something more complex, something that looked almost like pain. "She was at Elena's grave. She needed to be close to her mama," Iris said simply, refusing to look away from those terrible silver eyes. "I understand that need. I lost my mother 5 years ago, and I still visit her grave every night after my shift. Grief doesn't follow rules or schedules. It comes when it comes, and the only thing you can do is ride it out." For a long moment, the man just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, some of the tension in his shoulders eased, and he took a step further into the diner, moving with a grace that made Iris think of predators, of things that hunted in the darkness. "You gave her hot chocolate," he said, noticing the mug in Liliana's hands. "Her mother used to make her hot chocolate when she couldn't sleep," Iris explained. "It seemed like the right thing to do." Something shifted in his eyes. Something that might have been gratitude or might have been grief. It was impossible to tell. He turned his attention back to his daughter, his voice softening in a way that seemed almost unfamiliar to him. "Liliana, we need to go home. It's nearly dawn and you should be in bed." "Can Iris come visit me?" Liliana asked, her grip on Iris's hand tightening. "Please, Father. She listens to me. She understands about missing Mama. I don't want to lose her too." The request seemed to catch him off guard, uncertainty flickering across features that were otherwise carved from stone. He looked at Iris again, that searching gaze that seemed to see straight through her to something underneath. "That would be inappropriate," he said finally. "She is a stranger, Liliana, no matter how kind she may have been tonight." "She's not a stranger to me," Liliana insisted. And there was steel in her small voice, a stubbornness that clearly came from her father's side. "She's my friend. Mama always said that friends are the people who show up when you need them, and Iris showed up for me tonight. That makes her my friend." Iris felt tears threatening again at the child's fierce defense of her. "It's okay, Liliana," she said gently. "Your father is right to be cautious. We just met, and he doesn't know me. He's just trying to protect you." "But I don't want to lose you," Liliana whispered, and the desperation in her voice made Iris's heart crack open all over again. "You won't lose me," Iris promised, squeezing the small hand that clung to hers. "I work here every night. Whenever you need someone to talk to about your mama, whenever you want to share a memory or have some hot chocolate, I'll be here. Your father can decide when and if that's okay. But I'll always be here, Liliana. That's a promise." The man watched this exchange with an expression that grew increasingly complex, layers of emotion shifting beneath the surface of his controlled exterior. When Iris looked up at him again, she saw something she hadn't expected: vulnerability. "You would do that," he said slowly. "You would make yourself available to a child you just met, to help her process grief that is not your responsibility." "Why?" Iris met his gaze without flinching. "Because I remember what it was like to be alone with my grief, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone, especially not a child. Because your daughter is hurting, and I can help, and that's enough reason for me. Because kindness doesn't require a reason, and compassion isn't limited to people we already know." The silence that followed was heavy with something Iris couldn't name. The man stared at her for what felt like an eternity, his silver eyes searching for something she didn't know how to hide. "My name is Dominic Ashford," he said finally, "and I owe you a debt of gratitude for caring for my daughter tonight. I am not accustomed to owing debts, but I am not so proud that I cannot acknowledge when someone has done something worthy of thanks. You don't owe me anything, Iris said quickly. I didn't help Liliana for a reward. I helped her because she needed it and I was there. That is precisely why I owe you, Dominic replied, and there was something almost like wonder in his voice. In my experience, humans rarely act without expectation of reward. Your actions tonight have been genuinely selfless, and that is rarer than you might imagine. He moved toward the booth, his movements fluid and graceful, and extended his hand toward Liliana. Come, daughter, we must go home. But perhaps, he paused, his eyes flickering to Iris for just a moment. Perhaps we can discuss arrangements for you to visit your friend Iris at some point. Under proper supervision, of course. Liliana's face lit up with a joy that transformed her delicate features. She scrambled out of the booth, pausing only to throw her arms around Iris in a fierce hug that caught her completely off guard. Thank you, Liliana whispered against her shoulder. Thank you for listening. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for not making me feel crazy for missing Mama so much. Iris hugged her back just as fiercely. You're not crazy, sweetheart. You're grieving, and that's the most natural thing in the world. Don't let anyone make you feel ashamed of loving your mother enough to miss her. When Liliana pulled back, there were tears on both their faces, but they were the good kind of tears, the kind that came from connection rather than pain. The child took her father's hand and let him lead her toward the door, but she looked back over her shoulder the entire way, her silver eyes holding Iris's gaze until the door closed between them. Iris sat in the empty diner for a long time after they left, her coffee growing cold, her mind spinning. There had been something strange about Dominic Ashford, something beyond his beauty and his silver eyes and the power that radiated from him. But she had made a promise to a child who needed her, and Iris had never broken a promise. Whatever Dominic Ashford was, she would be there for Liliana. She was still sitting there when dawn began to creep through the windows. It was going to be a beautiful day, and she should have been home sleeping. But instead, she found herself thinking about silver eyes and small hands and grief shared between strangers. She had a feeling her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet understand. The next few days passed in a blur of normalcy that felt strangely hollow. Iris went to work, served coffee and pie to regulars, and tried not to think about Liliana and her father. She failed, of course. It was 4 days after that strange night when the black car pulled into the diner's parking lot. Iris recognized it immediately, sleek and expensive, and utterly out of place among the pickup trucks and worn sedans that made up her usual clientele. Her heart began to race as she watched the doors open, as she saw Liliana emerge from the back seat with a bodyguard she didn't recognize, as she saw Dominic Ashford unfold himself from the driver's side and pause to survey the diner with those unsettling silver eyes. They walked in together, Liliana practically running the moment she spotted Iris behind the counter, her face alight with a joy that made Iris's eyes sting with unexpected tears. Iris! The child launched herself forward, wrapping her arms around Iris's waist with the same fierce intensity she had shown that night. Father said I could come visit you. He said we could have hot chocolate together and I could tell you about my week and you could tell me about yours. Iris looked up to find Dominic watching them, his expression unreadable but his posture less hostile than it had been that first night. The bodyguard had positioned himself by the door, clearly more concerned with protecting his charges than with the menu. Mr. Ashford, Iris said, keeping her voice professionally pleasant while her mind raced. This is a surprise. Would you like a table? Dominic, he corrected. You may call me Dominic. And yes, we would like a table. My daughter has been quite insistent about this visit, and I have learned over the years that arguing with her stubbornness is an exercise in futility. There was a hint of dry humor in his voice that Iris hadn't expected, a warmth that softened his sharp features into something almost approachable. She led them to the same booth where she and Liliana had sat that first night, a choice that the child clearly appreciated based on the smile that spread across her face. "I'll get that hot chocolate started," Iris said. "And for you, Dominic?" "Coffee," he said. "Black. And perhaps some answers to questions that have been plaguing me since we last met." Iris felt a chill run down her spine at his words, but she nodded and retreated to the counter to prepare their drinks. When she returned, Liliana was chattering happily about her week, about the books she had read, and the drawings she had made, and the dreams she'd had where her mother came to visit her and told her everything would be okay. Iris listened and responded, asking questions and sharing observations, but she was acutely aware of Dominic's eyes on her the entire time, watching her interactions with his daughter, with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. When Liliana finally paused for breath, taking a long sip of her hot chocolate, Dominic spoke. "You intrigue me, Iris," he said, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry beyond their booth. "I have lived a very long time, and I have learned to read people with considerable accuracy. But you don't fit any of the patterns I expect. You showed genuine compassion to my daughter without any indication of ulterior motive. You spoke of grief with an honesty that suggested real experience rather than performed sympathy. And you made a promise to a child you had just met. A promise that most humans would have forgotten the moment we walked out the door." "I don't break promises," Iris said simply, and Liliana needed someone to listen to her. It wasn't complicated. "Everything is complicated," Dominic countered. "That is one of the fundamental truths of existence. The fact that you don't see the complications doesn't mean they don't exist." Iris felt a flash of irritation at his condescending tone. "Maybe for you," she said, her voice sharpening slightly. "But I've always found that kindness is actually pretty simple. Someone needs help, you help them. Someone is hurting, you try to ease their pain. It doesn't require complex motivations or hidden agendas." Dominic's eyes widened slightly, as if her pushback had surprised him. For a moment, something flickered across his face, something that looked almost like respect. "Father," Liliana interrupted, her voice carrying the exasperation of a child who had heard this kind of conversation before. "Stop interrogating Iris. She's my friend. You promised you would be nice." "I did make that promise," Dominic admitted, his tone softening as he looked at his daughter. "Very well. No more interrogation, but perhaps Iris would be willing to answer one more question, not as an interrogation, but as an attempt to understand." Iris nodded cautiously. "What do you want to know?" Dominic was quiet for a moment, his silver eyes holding hers with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "Why were you in the cemetery at 3 a.m? You said you visit your mother's grave after every shift, but that suggests a devotion that goes beyond normal grief. What are you looking for, Iris, in those midnight visits to the dead?" The question hit her like a physical blow, cutting straight to the heart of something she had never fully examined. She felt tears prick at her eyes, felt the familiar ache in her chest that came whenever she thought too deeply about her mother. "I'm looking for peace," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm looking for the feeling I had when she was alive, when I knew that no matter what happened, someone in this world loved me unconditionally. I'm looking for proof that love doesn't end just because the person you loved is gone." She paused, swallowing hard against the lump in her throat. "I'm looking for the same thing Liliana was looking for when I found her. Connection, comfort, the assurance that I'm not alone in the universe." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Liliana had gone still, her hot chocolate forgotten, her silver eyes wide with understanding. And Dominic was looking at Iris like she had just revealed something profound, something that had shifted his entire perception of her. "You found my daughter on her mother's grave," he said slowly, And instead of running away from the strangeness of that situation, instead of calling the authorities or demanding explanations, you sat with her. You listened to her. You shared your own grief to help her feel less alone in hers. He paused, his voice dropping even lower. You treated her like she mattered, like her pain was valid, like her need for connection was worthy of respect. Do you have any idea how rare that is? It shouldn't be rare, Iris said, and there was fire in her voice now, passion born of years of watching people dismiss each other's pain. It should be the most basic thing in the world, caring about each other, listening to each other, showing up for each other when it matters. But somewhere along the way, people forgot how to do that, or they decided it wasn't worth the effort. And now we're all walking around alone, even when we're surrounded by others. Dominic stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his silver eyes that Iris couldn't quite identify. Then, slowly, he nodded. You are either remarkably naive or remarkably wise, he said. I have not yet determined which. But either way, I find myself grateful that you were in that cemetery the night my daughter needed someone, and I find myself inclined to allow her continued contact with you, despite my usual caution regarding humans. Father, Liliana said, her voice small but hopeful. Does that mean Iris can come to our house? She could see Mama's garden. I want to show her where Mama planted roses for me when I was born. Dominic hesitated, and Iris saw the conflict play across his features. Whatever he was protecting, whatever secrets he kept, the idea of bringing her into his home clearly pushed against boundaries he was uncomfortable crossing. Perhaps, he said finally, the word seeming to cost him something. We will discuss it. For now, let us enjoy this visit and see how things progress. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either, and Liliana seemed to accept it with the wisdom of a child who had learned to pick her battles. She returned to her hot chocolate and her stories, filling the space with chatter that ranged from silly to profound, and Iris found herself relaxing into the conversation, letting go of the tension that had gripped her since they walked in. The afternoon passed quickly, and before Iris knew it, the sun was beginning to set, and Dominic was signaling that it was time to leave. Liliana hugged her goodbye with the same fierce intensity she had shown that first night, making Iris promise to be there the next time she visited. I'll be here, Iris assured her. I'm always here. That's my promise to you, Liliana. Dominic paused at the door, turning back to look at her with an expression that was somehow both guarded and open. Thank you, he said quietly. For today. For that night. For whatever it is you're doing that makes my daughter smile for the first time in months. He hesitated, then added, I hope you understand that what you've witnessed, what you're becoming involved in, there are things about my family that are not easily explained, things that might frighten you if you knew the full truth. I grew up in this town, Iris said simply. I've heard the stories about the family on the hill, about the people who never seem to age, who only come out at night, who have lived in that house for as long as anyone can remember. I'm not as naive as you think, Dominic. I just choose to judge people by their actions rather than by the rumors that surround them. Something flickered in his silver eyes, surprise and wariness, and something else that might have been hope. You know, he said softly, or at least you suspect. I know that your daughter needed someone to understand her grief, and I was there. I know that you love her enough to bring her here despite your obvious discomfort, and I know that whatever else you might be, you're a father who is trying to help his child survive an impossible loss. Iris met his gaze without flinching. Everything else is just details. Dominic stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, the corner of his mouth curved upward. You continue to surprise me, Iris, he said. I am beginning to think that is something I should get used to. He turned and walked out into the fading light, his daughter's hand in his. and Iris watched them go with the strange feeling that she was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. She should have been afraid. Everything she had heard about the Ashford family told her she should have run the moment she realized what they were. Instead, she found herself counting the days until she would see them again. Her life had definitely changed. And despite the danger she sensed lurking beneath the surface, Iris found that she didn't want to go back. Some chances were worth taking. Some connections were worth the risk. And some children needed someone to show up for them, no matter the cost. Iris had made her choice. Now she just had to see where it would lead her. The visits became a regular occurrence over the following weeks, Dominic bringing Liliana to the diner every few days so she could spend time with Iris. What had started as a reluctant concession to his daughter's wishes gradually became something more. The awkward silences of the first few visits giving way to genuine conversation, the suspicious glances becoming something warmer and more complicated. Iris learned more about the Ashford family with each visit. She learned that Dominic had been married to Elena for over a century, that their love had been the kind of thing poets wrote about, that her death had shattered something fundamental in him that he was still trying to piece back together. She learned that Liliana was their miracle, a child born against all odds to a vampire father and a human mother, carrying traits of both worlds in her delicate frame. She learned that Elena's grave in the town cemetery was there because she had loved the simplicity of the human world, had wanted to be buried among the people she had come to call neighbors rather than in the cold mausoleum of the Ashford estate. And she learned that Dominic Ashford, vampire king of the Eastern Territories, was not the cold and distant creature the town's legends made him out to be. He was a father struggling to raise a grieving child alone, a widower trying to navigate a world that had lost its color, a man, or whatever he was, who was slowly beginning to see Iris as something more than just his daughter's unlikely friend. "You should come to the house," Liliana said, one afternoon, about 6 weeks after their first meeting. "I want to show you Mama's garden. The roses are still blooming even though it's almost winter. Father says it's because Mama loved them so much that they refused to die." Iris looked at Dominic, expecting to see the usual resistance to any suggestion that brought her closer to his private world. Instead, she found him watching her with an expression that made her heart skip, something that looked almost like hope. "If you would like to see the garden," he said carefully, "I would not object. Liliana has been asking for weeks, and I find myself running out of reasons to refuse." "What reasons did you have?" Iris asked, genuinely curious. Dominic was quiet for a moment, his silver eyes holding hers with that intensity that still made her breath catch. "Fear," he admitted finally. "Fear that bringing you into my world would put you in danger. Fear that letting you see who I truly am would make you run. Fear that I was beginning to want things I had no right to want." The confession hung between them, heavy with implications that Iris wasn't sure she was ready to examine. But Liliana was looking at her with such hope, such desperate longing to share something precious, that she found herself nodding. "I'd love to see the garden," she said, "if you're sure it's okay." The Ashford estate was even more imposing up close than it had appeared from the town below. The house rose against the mountain like something from a Gothic novel, all dark stone and pointed towers and windows that seemed to watch her approach with ancient awareness. But Liliana's excited chatter as she pulled Iris through the massive front doors made it impossible to feel truly afraid. Her small hand a warm anchor in a world that was rapidly expanding beyond anything Iris had imagined. Elena's garden was behind the main house, a walled enclosure that seemed to exist in its own private world. The moment Iris stepped through the iron gate, she felt the change in the air, a sense of peace and beauty that seemed to transcend the ordinary world. The roses were indeed blooming, defying the late autumn chill with blossoms of deep red and pure white, and a pink so pale it was almost silver. There were other flowers too, plants that Iris didn't recognize, their petals catching the fading sunlight in ways that seemed almost magical. Stone pathways wound through the garden in graceful curves, leading past fountains and benches and arbors draped with flowering vines. Small statues peeked out from behind hedges, their faces serene and watchful. And everywhere, there were signs of the woman who had created this paradise, a pair of gardening gloves left on a bench as if she had just set them down, a book of poetry propped against a tree, a collection of painted stones arranged in patterns that seemed to tell stories Iris couldn't quite read. "Mama planted each one herself," Liliana said, leading Iris along the winding paths with the confidence of someone who had walked them thousands of times. She said that a garden was a way of leaving pieces of yourself behind, so that even when you were gone, something beautiful would remain. She spent years creating this place, choosing every plant, designing every pathway, making sure that everything was exactly the way she wanted it. Iris felt tears prick at her eyes, the words resonating with a truth that transcended the supernatural nature of the family she had stumbled into. "Your mama sounds like she was very wise," she said softly. "She was," Liliana agreed, stopping beside a rose bush that bore blooms of an unusual purple color. This was her favorite. She called it her evening star because the petals looked like the sky just after sunset. She planted it the year I was born, and she said it would bloom forever because her love for me would never fade. The child reached out to touch one of the delicate petals, her small fingers gentle against the flower. "I come here sometimes when I miss her the most," she continued. "I sit by her roses and tell her about my day, about the things I'm learning, about Father and how sad he's been, and sometimes, when the wind blows just right, it feels like she's answering me." "I think she probably is," Iris said, crouching down to be at Liliana's level. "The people we love never really leave us, sweetheart. They live on in the gardens they planted, in the memories we carry, in the love they left behind. Your mama might not be able to speak to you the way she used to, but she's still here, in every flower that blooms and every path you walk." Liliana looked at her with those silver eyes that were so like her father's, and Iris saw a wisdom there that went beyond her years. "That's what Mama used to say too," the child whispered. "That love never really dies, it just changes form. She would have liked you, Iris. I know she would have." Iris didn't know what to say to that, so she simply squeezed Liliana's hand and continued walking through the garden that a vampire's human wife had created, surrounded by flowers that refused to die because love was stronger than seasons. Dominic found them there an hour later, sitting on a stone bench beside a fountain that featured a sculpture of a woman who could only have been Elena. Liliana had fallen asleep with her head in Iris's lap, exhausted by the emotional weight of sharing her mother's garden with someone who could truly appreciate it. "She hasn't slept that peacefully in months," Dominic said quietly, settling onto the bench beside Iris with a grace that belied his size. "Not since Elena died. She has nightmares, most nights, and wakes up screaming for her mother." "Grief takes time," Iris said softly, her hand gently stroking Liliana's dark hair. "And children process it differently than adults. She's lucky to have a father who lets her feel her feelings instead of trying to make her suppress them." "I wasn't always so understanding," Dominic admitted. "In the first weeks after Elena's death, I wanted Liliana to be strong, to move past the pain, to become the composed heir that vampire society expected her to be. It took her sneaking out to the cemetery, nearly giving me a heart attack with worry, to make me realize that she needed space to grieve in her own way." He paused, his silver eyes meeting hers. "She needed you. And finding you was the first sign I'd had in months that maybe the universe wasn't entirely cruel." Iris felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I didn't do anything special. I just listened." "You did everything," Dominic corrected. You showed her that she wasn't alone in her grief. You gave her permission to miss her mother without shame. You became the friend she desperately needed when her entire world had collapsed. He reached out, his cool fingers brushing against her cheek with a gentleness that made her breath catch. And you showed me that not all humans are the selfish, fearful creatures I had come to believe them to be. The touch lingered, his hand cupping her face with a tenderness that seemed at odds with everything she knew about vampires. Iris found herself leaning into the contact, her eyes drifting closed, her heart racing with something that was equal parts fear and desire. "Dominic," she whispered, not sure what she was asking for, not sure what she was willing to give. "I know," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know this is impossible. I know there are 1,000 reasons why I should keep my distance, why I should let you return to your normal life and forget that my daughter ever stumbled into your path. But I find that I cannot. I find that I do not want to. And I find myself hoping, against all logic and reason, that you feel the same." Iris opened her eyes to find him watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. This was the moment, she realized, the moment where she either stepped back into the safety of her ordinary life or stepped forward into a world of darkness and danger and possibilities she had never imagined. She stepped forward. "I feel the same," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've felt it for weeks. Even when I tried to convince myself it was just concern for Liliana, just sympathy for a grieving family. But it's more than that, Dominic. When I'm with you, I feel like I'm finally awake after years of just going through the motions. I feel like I found something I didn't know I was looking for." The smile that crossed his face was like watching the sun rise after a long night. He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers, his breath cool against her lips. "Then perhaps," he murmured, "we should see where this leads. Together." The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of discovery and growing intimacy. Iris began spending more time at the estate, ostensibly to help Liliana with her studies and provide the female presence that the child desperately needed, but increasingly because she couldn't bear to be away from Dominic for long. Their conversations grew deeper, their touches more frequent, their connections strengthening with each passing day. She learned the rhythms of the ancient household, the way the servants moved silently through the halls, the hours when the sun made certain rooms dangerous for vampires, the rituals and traditions that had been observed for centuries. She learned that Dominic preferred to work in his study during the quiet hours before dawn, that he read poetry when he couldn't sleep, that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he felt safe enough to let down his guard. And she learned the 1,000 small ways he showed his love without saying the words. The fresh flowers that appeared in her room every morning, varieties she had mentioned admiring in passing, the books that showed up on her bedside table, titles she had expressed interest in during casual conversation, the way he would reach for her hand without thinking about it, as if touching her had become as natural as breathing. Liliana blossomed under the attention, her nightmares fading as she found security in the growing relationship between her father and her friend. She began to laugh again, to play with the abandon of a child who felt safe, to talk about her mother with joy instead of only pain. The shadows that had haunted her eyes in those first weeks slowly lifted, replaced by a brightness that made everyone who knew her smile. She started calling the diner Mama Iris's place, and the regulars there adopted her as their unofficial mascot, saving her the best cookies and asking about her lessons and her books. The waitress who had once been alone in the world suddenly found herself surrounded by community, by connection, by the kind of belonging she had given up on ever finding. "Mama would want this," Liliana told Iris one evening, as Iris helped her get ready for bed in the beautiful room that had once belonged to Elena. The space had been transformed over the months, Liliana's drawings now covering the walls alongside her mother's paintings, new memories layered over old without erasing them. She would want father to be happy again. She would want me to have someone who understands about losing people you love. She would want you to be part of our family. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Family. It was something Iris had given up on ever having again, something she had convinced herself she didn't need after years of being alone. But looking into Liliana's silver eyes, feeling the hope and love that radiated from the child, she realized that maybe she had been wrong. Maybe family wasn't something you were born into, but something you built. Choice by choice, moment by moment, act of love by act of love. Would you like that? She asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. If I became part of your family? Liliana's response was to throw her arms around Iris's neck, hugging her with a fierceness that said more than words ever could. The child's small body trembled with emotion, years of loneliness and grief finally finding release in the arms of someone who understood. More than anything, Liliana whispered, more than anything in the whole world. Dominic found them like that a few minutes later, standing in the doorway with an expression on his face that made Iris's heart ache with a love she had never expected to feel. He had been carrying the weight of grief and responsibility alone for so long, had convinced himself that Elena's death meant he was destined for solitude, and now here was proof that hope could grow even in the darkest soil. Come with me, he said softly after Liliana had been tucked in and kissed goodnight. There's something I want to show you. He led her to a part of the estate she had never seen, a private chamber at the top of the highest tower. The room was simple compared to the opulence of the rest of the house, just a few pieces of furniture and walls lined with shelves of books and artifacts that looked ancient beyond measure. This was Elena's space, Dominic explained, his voice rough with emotion. She came here when she needed to think, to process, to remember who she was beneath the titles and expectations. No one has been here since she died. Not even me. Iris looked around the room, seeing the touches that spoke of the woman who had created this sanctuary. Books with worn spines, clearly read many times, a painting on an easel, half-finished, capturing a sunrise over mountains that might have been visible from the tower windows. A collection of pressed flowers in frames on one wall, each one labeled in elegant handwriting. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. Dominic moved to stand beside her, his hand finding hers in the dim light. Because I'm ready to stop living in the past. Because I want to build a future. And I want you to be part of it. Because my daughter loves you. And I, against all expectation and reason, have fallen in love with you too. The confession stole her breath, made her heart race with joy and terror in equal measure. Dominic. You don't have to say anything now, he continued quickly. I know this is complicated. I know there are obstacles we haven't even begun to address. I'm a vampire, and you're human, and the world I live in is dangerous in ways you can't fully understand. But I wanted you to know the truth. I wanted you to know what you mean to me before you make any decisions about whether this is something you want to pursue. Iris turned to face him, reaching up to cup his face in her hands the way he had done to her in the garden. His skin was cool beneath her palms, but his eyes were warm, burning with an emotion that made her feel like the most precious thing in his ancient world. I love you too, she said, and the words felt like coming home. I don't know how we're going to make this work. I don't know what obstacles we'll face or what dangers might be waiting. But I know that I don't want to walk away from this. From you. From Liliana. From the family I didn't know I was looking for until I found a little girl sleeping on her mother's grave. Dominic pulled her close, holding her with a tenderness that belied his supernatural strength. Then we figure it out together, he murmured against her hair. Whatever comes, whatever challenges we face them as a family. The months that followed brought challenges, just as Dominic had warned. The vampire world did not easily accept a human in their midst, especially one who had captured the heart of their king. There were those who whispered that she was unsuitable, unworthy, a liability that would weaken the Ashford line. There were those who plotted to remove her, to return things to the way they had been, to eliminate the human who had dared to reach above her station. The first real test came 3 months after Iris moved into the estate. A delegation from the Vampire Council arrived unannounced, demanding an audience with Dominic to discuss the human situation. Their leader was a woman named Serafina, ancient and beautiful and cold as winter ice, who looked at Iris like she was something scraped off the bottom of a shoe. "This is unprecedented," Serafina declared, pacing the great hall, while Dominic sat impassively on his throne with Iris standing beside him. "A human in the king's household is one thing. A human sharing his bed is quite another. A human he intends to marry is an insult to every vampire who has ever served the crown." "My personal life is not subject to council approval," Dominic replied, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "The laws are clear on this matter. The king may choose his own consort, regardless of her origin." "The laws were written when such a situation was unthinkable," Serafina countered. "Times change. Expectations evolve. Surely you understand that a human queen would undermine centuries of tradition." Iris felt her heart racing, fear and anger warring in her chest. Part of her wanted to flee, to escape this world of ancient politics and dangerous rivalries, but a larger part, the part that had grown strong over months of loving Dominic and mothering Liliana, refused to be intimidated. "May I speak?" she asked, her voice steady despite her nerves. Serafina looked at her with barely concealed disgust. "Humans do not address the council. This human does." Iris stepped forward, drawing on every ounce of courage she possessed. "You speak of tradition and expectations, but what about love? What about family? I didn't choose to fall in love with Dominic. I didn't scheme to become queen. I simply found a grieving child in a cemetery and refused to leave her alone in her pain. Everything that followed grew from that single moment of compassion." She turned to face the assembled vampires, meeting their ancient eyes without flinching. "You can debate my worthiness until the sun burns out. You can question my motives and plot my removal and whisper about my unsuitability. But you cannot change the fact that I love this family, and they love me, and I will not abandon them because it makes some people uncomfortable." The silence that followed was absolute. Serafina's expression flickered between shock and reluctant respect, and the other council members exchanged glances that suggested Iris had done something unexpected. It was Dominic who broke the silence, rising from his throne to stand beside her. "You have your answer," he said to the council. "Iris is my chosen consort, and she will be my queen. Any who oppose this decision may challenge me directly. I trust there will be no challengers?" There were none, but Dominic stood by her through every trial that followed, his love unwavering, his protection absolute. And Iris proved herself worthy of that love time and again, facing down ancient vampires with the same quiet courage she had shown that first night in the cemetery, when she had wrapped her arms around a grieving child and refused to let go. Liliana flourished, the shadows that had haunted her fading as she found security in a complete family once more. She called Iris mother for the first time on a spring evening exactly 1 year after they had met, the words slipping out so naturally that it took them all a moment to realize what had been said. "Is that okay?" Liliana asked, suddenly uncertain. "I know you're not my real mama, but you feel like a mama to me, and I love you like a mama, and I thought maybe—" Iris pulled the child into her arms, tears streaming down her face, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. It's more than okay, sweetheart. It's the greatest honor I've ever received. Dominic watched them with tears of his own, the ancient vampire brought low by the simple miracle of a family rebuilt from grief and love. On a warm evening in late summer, exactly 2 years after Iris had found Liliana sleeping on Elena's grave, Dominic took her back to the cemetery where it had all begun. They walked hand in hand through the familiar paths, past the headstones and monuments that Iris had come to know, as well as the faces of her diner regulars, until they reached the plot where Elena rested. The grave looked peaceful in the golden light of sunset, the headstone surrounded by flowers that Liliana had planted during one of her visits. Someone had placed a small bench nearby, and Iris realized with a start that it must have been Dominic, creating a place where his daughter could sit and talk to her mother in comfort. "I wanted to do this here," Dominic said, his voice rough with emotion as he turned to face her. "Because this is where my life changed. This is where my daughter found hope again. This is where I began to believe that love could exist even after loss. This place, this sacred ground where my wife rests, is where I want to ask you the most important question of my existence." He dropped to one knee, and Iris felt her breath catch as he pulled a small box from his pocket. The setting sun cast him in shades of gold and amber, and she thought she had never seen anything more beautiful than this ancient being kneeling before her with his heart in his hands. "Iris," he said, "you came into our lives like a guardian angel, appearing exactly when we needed you most. You showed my daughter that grief could be shared, that pain could be eased, that it was possible to honor the dead while still embracing the living. And you showed me that my heart, which I thought had died with Elena, was still capable of love." He opened the box to reveal a ring that seemed to glow with its own inner light, a band of silver set with a stone that shifted colors like captured moonlight. The gem caught the fading sunlight and scattered it into rainbows that danced across Iris's face, as if the ring itself was celebrating the moment. "This ring belonged to Elena," Dominic continued, his voice trembling slightly. "She wore it on the day we married, over a century ago, and she told me once that if anything ever happened to her, she wanted whoever came next to have it. She wanted the next person I loved to know that she approved, that she gave her blessing, that love doesn't diminish when shared, but grows stronger." He looked up at her, and Iris saw that there were tears in his silver eyes, ancient and powerful and utterly vulnerable in this moment. "I didn't understand what she meant at the time. I couldn't imagine loving anyone else, couldn't conceive of a world where another woman would stand where she had stood. But Elena, she always saw further than I did. She knew that love would find me again, and she wanted to make sure I was brave enough to accept it when it did." Tears were streaming down Iris's face now, overwhelmed by the gift, by the blessing from beyond the grave, by the magnitude of what was being offered. She thought of Elena, the woman she had never met, but felt she knew through Liliana's stories and Dominic's memories, and the garden that still bloomed with impossible beauty. "Will you marry me, Iris?" Dominic asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Will you become my wife, Liliana's mother, part of a family that has already come to depend on you? Will you let me spend the rest of my existence showing you how grateful I am that you stopped in a cemetery on a cold night and chose kindness over caution?" "Yes," Iris whispered, then louder, finding her voice. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes." Dominic slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. He rose and pulled her into his arms, and they stood there beside Elena's grave, holding each other as the sun set around them. "Thank you," Iris whispered, and she wasn't sure if she was talking to Dominic or to Elena, or to whatever force of fate had brought her to that cemetery on that particular night. "Thank you for letting me be part of this family. Thank you for trusting me with your daughter. Thank you for loving me." Dominic held her tighter, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for finding us, for saving us, for showing us that love doesn't end with death, it just changes form." From nearby, they heard the sound of running feet, and then Liliana burst through the cemetery gates, having been waiting with the guards at the entrance. She had known about the proposal, had helped her father choose the moment and the words, and now she threw herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around their legs in a hug that nearly knocked them over. "She said yes," Liliana crowed, her silver eyes bright with joy. "I knew she would say yes. We're going to be a real family now. Mama would be so happy." Iris knelt down to embrace the child properly, holding her close while Dominic wrapped his arms around them both. The three of them stood there in the fading light, a family formed not by blood, but by choice, by compassion, by the simple act of one person refusing to walk past another's pain. "We should tell Mama," Liliana said suddenly, pulling back to look at the grave beside them. "She should know that her ring found a new home, that father found love again, that I have someone to braid my hair and read me stories the way she used to." Dominic nodded, his expression soft with emotion. "Would you like to say something, little one?" Liliana took a deep breath and turned to face her mother's headstone, her small voice carrying clearly in the quiet evening air. "Hi, Mama. I know you can hear me, because you always said love could reach across any distance. Father asked Iris to marry him, and she said yes. And I'm going to have a real family again. But you're still my first mama, and I'll never forget you. And I'll come visit you forever and ever, until I'm as old as Father." She paused, then added more quietly, "Thank you for sending Iris to us. I know it was you, because she found me on the exact night when I needed someone the most. You always knew how to take care of me, even from far away." Tears were streaming down Iris's face again as she listened to the child speak to her mother with such simple faith, such pure love. She thought about her own mother, buried just a short walk from where they stood, and felt a connection spanning generations of loss and love and the enduring bond between parents and children. "Your daughter is remarkable," she said softly to Elena's headstone, "and your husband is the best man I've ever known. Thank you for loving them both enough to let them love again. I promise I'll take care of them for as long as I exist." Dominic's arm tightened around her, and she felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. "Elena would have adored you," he murmured. "She always said that the measure of a person was how they treated those who could offer them nothing in return. You showed kindness to our daughter when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. That's exactly the kind of person Elena wanted in Liliana's life." And standing in the cemetery where 2 years of joy and healing had begun, surrounded by the people she loved, wearing the ring of a woman she had never met but felt she knew intimately, Iris realized that Liliana was right. Elena would be happy, because love had found a way, because her daughter had found a mother, because her husband had found hope again, and because sometimes, in the darkest moments of grief, the universe sends exactly the person you need, even if you don't recognize them at first. The waitress who had found a little girl sleeping on her mother's grave had become a vampire queen. The grieving child had found a second mother who understood her pain, and the ancient king who had lost his wife had discovered that his heart was still capable of love. It wasn't the ending Iris had expected when she set out for the cemetery on that cold autumn night. It was so much better. It was everything she had never known she was waiting for. Home at last. Family at last. Exactly where she was always meant to be.